Hello, friends. The Dancing Men is considered by most to be one of the finest adaptations to grace the Granada series. It was then quite a treat to find ourselves in conversation with the incredible actress who portrayed the tragically fated Elsie Cubit in that memorable episode of our beloved show. I refer to, of course, Miss Betsy Brantley. We discussed Betsy's memories of the series, but also touched on other facets of her career, including her work in other iconic films such as The Princess Bride and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Our conversation was conducted some weeks ago over Zoom, and so the quality is what you might expect from an internet call. But we had a grand time talking with Betsy, and I think you'll agree that any connection issues were a small price to pay for such a colorful discussion with such a wonderful lady. And one final nod of gratitude to friend of the show, Richard, who helped us facilitate this remarkable conversation. Richard, we owe you one. So, without further ado, we give you Betsy Brantley. Well, Betsy, there really are no words to describe just how cool it is to talk with you today, so thank you for taking the time.
Well, I'm speechless by that. Thank you.
Well, we like to start at the very beginning, which is a very good place to start, as Julie Andrews might say. As a girl, were you a fan of the Sherlock Holmes stories?
Yes, but growing up in Appalachia, Nancy Drew probably, and, I just dated myself, Nancy Drew probably took precedent.
Yeah.
But I love Sherlock Holmes and I love a mystery.
Your own story kind of began somewhat similarly to that of Elsie Cubit in that you were originally from America, but you ended up in England somehow. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Yes, I went to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and the summer between the junior and senior year, I did a summer school in England, and that was my first trip. And so during my senior year, I applied for what was a graduate school, summer school in Shakespeare in Stratford-on-Avon at the Institute, and got accepted. And it was basically the summer we read the whole works of racing through Shakespeare. And while I was there, I asked people about auditioning for drama schools in London and was told RADA, Lambda, and Central. And as they were called at the time, I think everything's Royal now, but I went to Central School of Speech and Drama, or what now is the Royal School of Speech and Drama. And by the time I was finished with my second year, married an actor who was in school with me. We were married for a year and we divorced. Big Southern wedding. And then stayed and worked for, I guess, the next dozen years. And that was when, during that time, I did Elsie Cubit and loved it. I loved working there. I went from London to LA and found LA about fame as opposed to about the sort of purity of the process, which was the draw for me.
Right.
So, I liked working in London very much.
Yeah. IMDb has your very first on-camera role coming from Shock Treatment, the infamous sequel to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, 1981. But your credit in the 1982 film 5 Days, One Summer with Sean Connery and directed by legendary Fred Zinnemann, I mean, wow, reads introducing Betsy Brantley, which is usually reserved for a first appearance on screen. Can you clear up that mystery? Which role came first?
One was small budget cult film and the other was Warner Brothers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mentioned those two films in particular, and you may or may not know this, but beyond your wonderful presence in the cast, there are one or two other connections to the Granada Sherlock Holmes series there, too. Actually, Shock Treatment obviously has Charles Gray, who went on to play Sherlock's brother Mycroft in the series.
Yeah.
But also, 5 Days, One Summer had Anna Massey, who was Jeremy Brett's first wife.
Right.
Yeah.
I loved both of them. They were both very kind. Anna Massey, I spent a lot of time with in Switzerland. she would rehearse with me before we were doing our scenes, because it was by far the biggest role I'd had at that point. And it can sort of relate to the budget. As soon as there is a serious money involved, people get very serious. And up to that point, I just had a lot of fun. And it may sound really trite, but that's usually been my focal point. Is that I want to enjoy the process. And that doesn't always mean laughing,
right?
But it means that it's engaging your brain and your heart. 5 days in summer, pretty stressful that way. But it was a big learning curve.
Right. And Charles Gray, I mean, did you get to spend much time on set with him?
No, I did not spend much time with him, but I found him to be a perfect gentleman. And we were the whole movie basically happens in one airplane hangar.
Right.
And so you were always around as a group, but I did not spend a lot of time with him alone.
Yeah. Well, The Dancing Men comes next, but how did that come about? I mean, was there an audition? What was the casting process like?
Well, what I love about the whole process in England and drama schools in general, and was very surprised to see it was quite different. This is many years ago, but at the time it was quite different than in America, is that it was much more, not regimented so much as organized, that in America at the time, you could basically pay your dues and become a member of Screen Actors Guild. Mm-hmm. In England, there were only so many places for their actors union. And because I was in drama school, when you were in the last year of the 3-year program, you are inviting as many agents that are willing to come to all the shows. And so you get an agent through that process. And then the agent sends you out for equity card jobs. But I got a job on the last tour that Brian Ricks did with Simple Simon before he retired. He did bedroom farces, and it was a kind of dying breed at the time, but he did this one final tour. It was Reading, Oxford, Playhouse, and Cambridge. And so it got me into the union with a 6-week tour, and usually you'd have to go to the provinces and you would have to commit to a year as part of a rep. And so, that was just great. But I mean, I am very aware of how lucky / blessed I was. I mean, it all just sort of fell into place. And I always kept thinking, well, if you're doing it for the right reasons, then it might just happen, maybe.
Yeah, but so it was with that agent and on that card that you were presented to Granada? Is that how it came about? Did you have to audition? Yes,
I did. And yes, I remember auditioning for this, and I remember really liking the people that were doing it. And it was kind of a magical experience. Jeremy Brett was a magician. He was bigger than life.
I was just going to ask you that question. I mean, as this show was one of the very first episodes that was shot, what was it like at that time?
Well, because I was so new to the whole process, I just figured they were all like this. And then you find out not all of them are as thoughtful or as kind. I mean, there were wonderful people involved, and we were in a wonderful house. We were in Lancashire at Leighton Hall, and the couple that owned Leighton Hall could not have been more accommodating. And that's pretty harsh to have a camera crew come in and take over. Right. But we all got along very well. I remember Susie, it's Richard and Susie Reynolds, and Susie was just so enthusiastic. And she, at one point, had come in and had muddy shoes on, and Jeremy was there, and she was trying to take the shoes off, and he had one of those, I guess it was a beaver coat. I don't know what it was, but he threw it on the floor for her to walk on.
Oh.
So she wouldn't have to take her shoes off. And she just thought that was just wonderful. So that was, in a way, it was everything that I had always thought being an actor would be, that everybody was, they all got the joke, one for all and all for one.
Yeah.
And we were in this stunning location. So yeah, it was a joy.
Well, now your scenes in The Dancing Men were all with the wonderful Tennille Evans, who played your husband, or Eugene Lipinski. And I want to talk about both those gentlemen, but you actually, uniquely, I think, you didn't have any actual scenes with Sherlock Holmes in this episode. So I was curious to know, did you get to spend much time with Jeremy Brett during the shooting? Was he there with you? How did that work?
It's so funny you mentioned that, because if you'd asked me at the time, I would have been shocked to find that we didn't have any scenes together, because we were on location. Everyone was in the hotel together. Everyone was around together all the time. So I very much felt like I spent a lot of time with Jeremy, but it would be, when we were having lunch or when we were back at the hotel and everybody's at the bar. And so I was surprised to realize I hadn't actually had any things with him. We all would go, like, when we had days off, we'd all go on trips together and things. I mean, it was go eat in a restaurant together. And we had, I think I can say this officially, we had some wonderful pub visits. And we were filming at a time of year where we could be in gardens and drink Pimm's. And honest to God, I remember thinking, because I was close enough to having come out of drama school at that point, I remember thinking, this is everything I thought it was going to be. This is the life of the actor.
Right, yeah. How did you and Tennille get on? How was that?
He was just delightful. He was so caring. It was like he was always trying to sort of make sure I was okay. And it was almost like just a big older brother.
Yeah.
He was quieter than a lot of the actors, because actors can be very loud. But he was so gentle and he was so gracious that he was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Eugene Lipinski, Abe Slaney, at first I thought he was a British actor doing a great American accent, but it turns out he's a British-born Canadian actor.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, this is really saying something out of turn for me, but he's such a nice guy that I'm not sure that about his comfort level with sort of playing the baddie. But, actors have to do that. I know it sounds like we were all just, in romper room, but we really did have fun together. It's very rare to have a group of people that you don't have sort of the one pill, but it was a joy. The whole thing was a joy. In fact, I was just trying to think of, was there any kind of problem? The only problems that I can think of that I had were to do with, like, costume and hair.
Yeah.
And it wasn't people at all. They ordered a very, very expensive wig for me to wear. And it was, like Italian nun's hair.
Yeah.
And they were very nervous because we were coming up to the first day of shooting and it hadn't arrived. Mm. And it literally arrived, special post the night before shooting. And when she tried to put it on my head the next day, it had been, and this is something that I did not realize up to this point, it had been laid backwards. Your hair grows in a pattern and it tends to one direction or another. So if you are lucky, your hair grows away from your forehead so it doesn't fall on your face.
Yeah.
So the direction of this hair went straight down in front of your face. Hmm. So when you pulled it back, there was no way for it not to look like a wig because it was working against its tendency. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. What did you end up doing about that?
She just cut a few little tendrils around the front to give me those little kind of soft curly bits.
Yeah.
And we just hoped it worked.
We actually heard from Barbara Wilshire that she wore a wig for Violet Smith in The Solitary Cyclist, and she found out later that the cost of the wig was more than her entire fee for acting.
Oh, that's hilarious. I mean, These are things we love. So those kinds of shared experiences on a set, that's the camaraderie. Everybody goes, oh my God, you know what? They paid for this waistcoat. It's like, woo!
Yeah.
I had the most beautiful wedding dress with the most elaborate embroidery all down the train, and you never saw it.
Oh, yeah.
I had never worn a corset before. I'd worn it like we did restoration drama in drama school, and I had done it for a couple of scenes and things, but I'd never worn one day in, day out. And the first day I had the corset on and we broke for lunch, I ate what would for me be a normal lunch. And we went to shoot after that, and I thought I was going to faint because the food kind of stops at your heart. And all of a sudden I thought, this is why women had smelling salts. They couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
I'd have an apple for lunch after that.
Yeah. Did you have much interaction with Michael Cox, the producer? Was he on set much? Did you ever meet him?
I met him, not a lot of interaction, but I'm a weird actor that way, and they would try to tell you what shot they were doing. I'd say, just give me the frame. I never wanted to know detail because I didn't want to have it going on in my head while I was playing the part.
Yeah.
So I tried not to notice the business conversations going on in the corner.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've had a remarkable career in so many ways, each role having unique challenges, including obviously things like performance modeling for Jessica Rabbit, just to name one. But were there any particularly challenging moments that you recall from the shooting of this one? I seem to recall, beyond just having to run in that period dress and wig, that must have been a challenge, but anything come to mind?
Well, the things that you require of yourself sometimes are, in retrospect, minute compared to the overall effect. I remember thinking that I needed to get a Chicago accent down, and I never did. I never had any real exposure. You couldn't Google it then.
Yeah, right.
And therefore, in Lancashire, I never really had exposure to it. And so every time I would say something that came out Southern, I'd cringe. Or even English, because at that point I'd been in England so long. And when I did Guys and Dolls at the National, Guardian, I think it was the Guardian newspaper critic, said her performance would be utterly American if it weren't for her English rose look. And I wrote him and said, born and bred in the South, so anything that you see that's English is applied since I've been in England. And it made me really focus on trying to, in my brain, separate. I remember when I'd lived in England for that amount of time, I would come back to the States and I stopped talking to anybody on the phone for the first 2 or 3 days I was back, because I would come back here and it'd take me 2 or 3 days to get the English accent out.
Right.
and vice versa. So depending on whatever I was playing, a lot of actors do that. That you just try to maintain whatever accent you've got for the part.
Yeah.
On the podcast, we're quite frequently corrected for our own American pronunciation of British words or locations. And I actually wondered if they had you say Derbyshire on purpose, or if they just enjoyed it because it was genuine.
Yeah, I have to tell you, unfortunately, that was my, I think, bad improv. I think I was overdoing it.
No, I think it's great. I think it's genuine. I like it.
Because there is that kind of transatlantic, Anglo-English, whatever we call it, that I think would have probably, in retrospect, been appropriate for that. But all the actors I knew, we were always just uber critical whenever we saw ourselves in anything. So that was what I saw. But also, you have to think of the period. It's not like they sound like Al Capone in that era.
Right.
But who knows what they sounded like.
Yeah,
especially if raised, you could have a father that sounded like Al Capone and he'd send you off to finishing school.
Right.
True.
I mean, it is fascinating. I think it's so much fun. All these wonderful questions that are just defining that person for you. I mean, that's the draw, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, one other interesting moment that comes to mind, it's that very long shot at the end when you turn, you see your husband's been shot, and the camera just stays on you as you go to him, but then it continues to push in closer and closer and closer until that moment when you pick up the gun and you put it to your temple. Mm-hmm. That's all one camera shot. And frankly, I mean, it takes quite a performance to be able to hold the audience for that long.
I find those shots in many ways easier than other things. The intensity of that, I loved. And I loved that he didn't break the momentum.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's overall, it's just an incredible performance. I mean, it runs the gamut because you start off so happy in the show and then it turns to fear and then abject sadness. And I mean, it is one of the darkest stories in the Sherlock Holmes canon, but I think it's truly great.
I think from someone being behind the camera, breaking up those kind of shots makes sense in your mind because you're going, I need coverage, I need this, I need that. But I think for the actor, it's different because, like you say, you get to live through the scene and it might be easier that way. It makes more sense.
Absolutely. And in fact, you might be able to have your cake and eat it too, because you can do that shot for the actor and then you can come in coverage and do other things. And I should have looked at the episode again before talking to you guys because I'd forgotten that was one shot. And, as you mentioned it, I remember it. And because I don't know, the word these days seems to be empath. I get way too involved in other people's stories and have a hard time pulling back sometimes. And I felt so sad for her.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so sad. But it was an amazing thing to do in that house because that house had such a history. The bedroom that we used, the bed was the bed that was there for, I don't know how long, 100 years or whatever. Yeah. And they called it, they had a name for the bed because of all the generations that had been born on that bed. They called it the battleground.
That's awesome.
What was your reaction to actually seeing that scene the first time on TV?
It sounds so pitiful to say. I just felt really sad for her. I was like, oh, Elsie, you didn't have to do it.
Yeah.
That's one of the things about Sherlock Holmes, of course, since working on it and during, I was in my spare time reading everything. And of course, I'd known Basil Rathbone, etc. But in the same way that I think Dickens would do, I was always amazed at how those situations were things that would repeat themselves through history. It's all a human condition writer, and I always think those are the ones that transcend time.
Absolutely.
And so these stories live forever. And there's a scene where she turns and looks at him and says, it'll all look better in the morning. And I thought, woo, we've all had those moments in our relationships.
Yeah.
And that's very open for that era to kind of reveal those moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you ever end up working with any of the cast or crew from The Dancing Men later on in your career?
I don't think so. We did do a reunion at Granada when they released the whole series, and it was so sweet to see Jeremy again. And then we had this big group shot of, Sherlock and all of his women. And he's going, Betsy, come here. And he sat me right beside me. Oh, it's so sweet.
Yeah. I was really curious about that image because it's out there on the internet and it seems so strange that you would all be together. But yeah, that's really interesting to know.
Yeah, it was coming together to do the PR to release the whole series.
Yeah. And Jeremy's like holding the book, I think, of the Sherlock stories.
What was it about him? He just had... It's like simpatico. You just wished him well. And so often, it's the troubled spirits who have that,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did you end up watching any other episodes of the Sherlock Holmes series over the years?
Oh, I've seen all, I think.
Yeah.
Tried to, and at various times and various mediums.
Right. Any of them stand out as favorites to you?
Oh, man. Honest to God, I cannot say that I do. Every time I see that anything's that's showing, and it has to be on whatever DirecTV offers you because I can't stream. That's how bad my computer signal and everything else is.
Yeah.
But I just always try to watch them. I mean, all of them.
Yeah.
I thought the caliber was very consistent, and they had a high bar.
Yeah, definitely. Well, if you're in the mood to watch them at any given time, I would highly recommend the Blu-ray set because they remastered them from the original film elements, and the detail is so amazing. It looks like a brand new show. It's amazing.
I will definitely go get that Blu-ray set. That's a wonderful thing to hear.
Yeah. Speaking of different mediums, I actually streamed the episode last night, and there's in that opening scene, there's a bit of sleight of hand in that opening shot. There's a blood spot on your knuckle from when you pricked it on the rose bush. And I always wondered, Did somebody dab that on you, or were you hiding it from the camera?
I don't remember.
We're going deep here. We're going deep on this podcast.
Yeah.
I do know that they stapled the roses to the rose bush.
Oh, really?
You do another take and you have to have more roses.
Right.
Yep, exactly.
We couldn't agree more about the high bar of quality. We've actually been trying to lend our voice to an effort to kind of champion a posthumous BAFTA for Jeremy Brett, which he never received really any official recognition for the series. But I mean, considering we're talking about it now and there's just so many fans that still love the series, it would be really wonderful if he could be recognized. But so far we've hit brick walls on that, but we've had some help. Stephen Fry is lending his voice to the campaign as well. So maybe with luck, we'll be able to get him some kind of award. We'll see.
You know, I always saw him as the kind of actor that drew me to the profession. He had a passion, and he had a passion about life. And that is why I love actors.
Yeah.
Because I don't understand when someone becomes an actor if they're not trying to live their life at a 12 instead of a 10, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
He had that in buckets.
Yeah. Yes.
God bless him. It's the act. It's when we all were gypsies, you know, and in a good way. Our caravans were very colorful.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a joy, and when I got to LA, it was a business.
Yeah.
And it's just night and day.
Yeah, that's kind of what we keep hearing with these interviews is we never hear a bad story. We hear a different kind of amazing story about Jeremy and why people loved him, and it just makes us love him even more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of Hollywood, this is a bit of a digression, but I feel like we'd be completely remiss if we didn't at least ask you about The Princess Bride, as it is one of the most iconic films of all time. How did that one come about for you? I'm just curious.
You know, it's funny. It's very similar experience. Very similar. It was odd in that I was the beginning of the movie, which often happens, is the last thing they shot. So when Rob Reiner and Andy, when they interviewed me, they said, you know, it's just a couple of days and it's, you know, I can't remember what studio. We were at Lee Studio, I think. Anyway, they said, we've had a shoot that we just thought was spectacular. So everybody's in a good mood. You'll find it to be a fun set. And it was Peter Falk. I fell in love with Peter Falk. And he is like that old school actor, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, you could sort of, there is a kind of a cliche, but it pretty much holds true that theater people that came from theater have an expectation of everyone being part of the family. And then they either find that desirable or not. I remember being asked when I was working, and this is an aside, when I was working on Roger Rabbit, which of course was made in England, I remember being asked by an American actress, why are you in England? And I said, I just feel really comfortable here. I love what I'm doing here and I keep working. So if it ain't broke. And she said, but don't you want to be famous? And I said, I mean, I think that's like a side effect. And some people have to deal with that.
Right.
And she literally said, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Peter Falk was eccentric, and we would go back to our dressing rooms when they were setting up the scenes, and he'd be up and down the hall going over his lines. You know, you could run lines with him anytime. My part was so tiny, but it was so much fun because we all would have lunch together, and there was no real pressure because they really got the whole thing in the can. Right. And I get to hear all the stories about when they were filming in, I don't know where they were, in Northern England. And Peter Falk would tell stories about moving out of Manhattan into New York State. And his father says, you know, it's a good town. There's a good school. There's a good hospital and there's a good jail. So we're in good shape.
That's all you need.
I love that vibe that you describe. Peter Falk is a perfect example. I mean, he was in all the cast. Well, quite a few of the Cassavetes films, and those films had that very organic, we're all a team, we're all a family kind of a feel to them, which I adore that.
I think it shows if it's there or if it's not.
Yeah.
You can have two people on the same screen, but if they don't have a relationship for real of some sort, then I think you can sense it. That's my opinion. But he came the day before he was supposed to film. And so the makeup woman who I adored was nervous because he said he thought, God rest his soul, he said he thought that he looked too young to be the grandfather. And so he would need some prosthetics. And so they prepared all these prosthetics just from the measurements on his face. And he arrived the day before they were starting filming. And, he had a false eye. And so the muscles on that side of his face were not in relation to that the same way. They weren't getting the same usage as they were on the other side, like when you're trying to focus and you squint.
Yeah.
And so the prosthetics were not ideal. And of course, this is long ago, and that you didn't watch digital, you watched daily. So today you watched what you filmed yesterday, and what you filmed today you'll watch tomorrow. So I finished my day, and it was just one day, and it was delightful. And then I got a call that night saying, we need you for 2 more days because we need to reshoot everything, because by the end of the day, the prosthetics are kind of perched on Peter's cheeks, and he had a 5 o'clock shadow underneath it, and he looked like Santa's elf. So we reshot, and that was delightful. It was just more fun. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Roger Rabbit, so I'm going to ask you one question about that, because I am curious. Zemeckis famously, I guess, used very real, very serious actors for all the stand-in characters in the film. But what was that experience like for you? Because that was before mocap as we know it today. How did you do that back in 1988, standing in for Jessica Rabbit?
I mean, it was fascinating. It was one of those wonderful jobs because I didn't have to go to makeup in the morning. I could sleep in, and I could come in, and all I had to do was focus on the other actors.
Yeah.
That was a great exercise. And I did have to wear 4-inch high heels because what they did was they filmed all of Jessica Rabbit's scenes with me that you could physically do. She was a cartoon. And they would send them to the cartoonist. So Dick would draw based on what I was doing in the scene. And when they were in the Ink and Paint Club, and Jessica Rabbit leans over and pulls Bob Hoskins' tie and pulls him to her, they would film that, and then whatever you were saying, you'd go off camera, and they had a device, special effects, so to speak, that would just have a string, or I think in this case it was a sort of stiff wire behind the tie that pulled the tie up. And so 1,000,000 times a day, we'd do the scene, and then Bob would go, "Here, Betsy, come over here." And he'd place you, he'd hold your shoulders and hold you right in front of him, and he'd look at your eyes, and he'd move you over about 4 inches and then see what point in the wall was where your eyes were when he's looking. So he would line it up right. But then he even said, there is a difference when you focus at 2 feet or focus at 5 feet. So he couldn't look at the wall. He had to imagine you in between him and the wall.
Yeah.
Otherwise, in a close-up, it would look different in his eyes. It would look like he was not focused.
So did they have you dress up much for that, or you weren't in Jessica Rabbit's gown, I assume, most of the time?
Charlie Fleischer had to make a Roger Rabbit costume. I didn't have to do any of that. I literally only had to wear, I'd wear a skirt, but all I had to do was wear the shoes, because her dimensions were something like 48, 12, 44.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that must have been an adventure, though. I mean, it's film history in a sense, because it's Disney Warner Brothers co-production. I mean, how often does that happen?
Yeah, you did feel like you were doing something new, and they were excited. I didn't have to worry about all the industrial light and magic stuff. So I was all right, Jack.
What are you working on these days?
Well, I'm mostly doing voiceovers. I haven't done anything in front of the camera in years. I live in a converted log cabin at the end of a dirt road, and I love it. I just finished, sounds a little bizarre, but I just finished doing a voiceover for my ex-husband's next movie.
Wow.
Steven Soderbergh was my husband, and he's just made a movie. Do you know Zoe Kravitz, Lenny Kravitz's daughter?
Yeah,
Sure.
She's starring in a movie called Kimmy, and it's about one of those Alexa machines.
Oh, yeah.
Only in the movie, the machine is called Kimmy, and I am Kimmy.
Wow.
Congratulations.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah. Well, Betsy, I feel like we could go on for hours, but this has truly been a joy to speak with you today. I mean, we've been hoping to be able to connect with you for so long, but this is just, I mean, it's been so great, and we really cannot thank you enough for doing this. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
You are totally welcome. It is my pleasure, and I really am serious when I say thank you for your interest in Sherlock Holmes and this series, and for your energy in supporting something which I think merits all the attention. For Jeremy, I mean, how do you feel about this? Jeremy, to me, ran the gamut of all of these different personality traits that Sherlock Holmes has that was a unique take on it in a way that opened it up and kind of made it broader than I thought it had been before that.
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons why we keep going back to this series, I feel like Jeremy was finding the character even through the course of the show. And so like when you watch it the first time, you're wowed by how great Jeremy is.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, he's doing something new and unique and bringing all this energy and physicality to the role. And it's wonderful. But if you go back and watch it again and you really kind of pay attention to the way he reveals new aspects of the character over the seasons, it's really like he was finding that character and really kind of getting to know him. And frankly, I mean, based on his own words, which we've read a lot of on this show, and he was digging deep and trying to understand the character. And I think if he were here, he might say that he never really quite figured it out, but it was the journey of trying. And to me, that's the greatest gift. I mean, how many actors have ever given us a gift like that? It's just amazing.
There was also a great quote of Jeremy's, which he said, Sherlock was the kind of person I wouldn't want to cross the road to meet him. But I think, as Gus is saying, in trying to investigate him and find these different facets of how to portray him, I think he kind of brings a humanity to him that maybe some of the other people haven't, where he feels dark and brooding, but you also get the human side of him.
Well, what's funny about that is Jeremy revised that quote later on to say, I used to say that, but I think what I'd rather say is Sherlock Holmes would never want to cross the street to meet me.
Okay. That's funny.
Yeah.
I really feel like that's the key, Luke, was that humanity aspect, because it's very easy for Sherlock Holmes to not care about humanity in portrayals.
Yeah.
And there's something that Jeremy did, which, as an actor, the other thing that just occurred to me based on what you're saying is the confidence that it takes to have your discovery happening in front of the camera
Yeah.
is pretty great.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.